All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at, well, it's a big one. I mean, trying to figure out how we got from the medieval world to, all the stuff we think about as modern.
It's a pretty massive shift.
It really is. I mean, you've got art changing, religion changing, even politics changing. People went from this whole God is the center of everything thing to, wait, maybe we humans actually matter.
It's a fascinating period.
And luckily, the sources we've got are all about two huge movements that really get at the heart of all that change. The Renaissance and the Reformation. So we'll be running into names like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Martin Luther going head-to-head with the church, the whole deal. But we're not just going to be throwing names and dates at you.
No, definitely not.
We'll see how stuff like the printing press, think of it as old-school Twitter, spread these wild new ideas all over Europe. And here's a fun fact. People started ditching Latin and writing in their own languages.
Huge moment for nationalism, that was.
Exactly. By the end of this deep dive, you'll see how all these pieces fit together, and more importantly, why it still matters today.
Looking forward to it.
So before we get all caught up in the excitement of the Renaissance and the Reformation, let's set the stage right. What was going on in Europe that kind of made all this change possible?
Okay, so picture Europe in the late Middle Ages.
Yeah.
You've got feudalism running the show. Basically, everyone has their place, from kings down to peasants. And the thing is, land equals power.
So not a lot of social mobility back then?
Not really, no. And the Catholic Church, they're pretty much calling the shots on, well, everything.
Right, like this unchangeable order.
Pretty much.
Right.
But, as with any system, things start to crack eventually, right?
Cracks? Like what?
Well, trade starts picking up again, cities are growing, a new merchant class is emerging, and these folks aren't tied to the land like peasants.
They're the ones making money through trade.
Exactly. And having money means they want a say in how things are run. So there's this new middle class shaking things up.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're here, we've got money now, and we want a voice.
Exactly. And then bam, the Black Death hits in the 14th century.
Yeah, the plague. A whole turning point in history right there.
Think about it. Feudalism depended on tons of peasants working the land.
But the plague wipes out so many people.
Exactly. And that scarcity of labor suddenly gives the peasants more power.
Because they can demand better wages, better conditions.
Exactly. So even a horrible tragedy like the Black Death can have these surprising side effects, changing who has power and who doesn't.
Wow. So you've got these cities growing, the plague shaking things up, and on top of that, you start to see powerful monarchs consolidating their control, pushing back against the nobility.
Right. It's a gradual process, but all these things, the cities, the Black Death, the monarchs, they're all chipping away at the medieval world, making room for something new.
And that something new is where the Renaissance comes in, right? This whole rebirth idea. What's that really about?
Well, the Renaissance was all about rediscovering the stuff from ancient Greece and Rome. The art, the literature, their ideas about the world. It's like they hit the refresh button on culture.
Going back to the classics for a fresh perspective.
Exactly. Think of it like a cultural awakening. And with that awakening came a big shift in how people saw themselves and their place in the world. That's where humanism comes in.
Humanism. Break that down for me a bit.
Well, before the Renaissance, it was all about God and the afterlife. This life on earth, just a pit stop on the way to heaven. But humanism changes that.
Okay.
It puts humans front and center, all their potential, their accomplishments, their ability to reason and make their own choices.
So instead of looking up at the heavens, they start looking around and thinking, hey, we humans are pretty amazing down here too.
It's a huge shift. And you see it reflected in Renaissance art. There's this focus on realism, human emotion, individual personality. Paintings and sculptures aren't just these stiff, symbolic figures anymore.
They feel real.
They feel real. You can relate to them. Think about Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, right? That mysterious smile, that gaze. It's all about capturing the essence of a person.
Or Michelangelo's David.
Right. That powerful, perfectly sculpted body. It's a celebration of what humans can achieve.
You know, I've always loved those pieces, but I never really thought about them in that context as part of this bigger shift towards humanism.
It's fascinating to see how art reflects the ideas of its time.
It really is.
And the impact of humanism? Well, it's huge. It lays the groundwork for our emphasis on individual rights, freedom of expression, the pursuit of knowledge. All these things that we value today have their roots in the Renaissance.
It's like those Renaissance thinkers planted seeds that are still growing.
Exactly. But this wasn't just happening in Italy, right? How do these Renaissance ideas spread to the rest of Europe?
Well, I think we both know what's coming next.
The printing press.
You got it.
Mm-hmm.
That old-timey Twitter we talked about before, it totally revolutionized the spread of knowledge.
Before that, books had to be copied by hand. Took forever.
Yeah.
Which meant that knowledge was basically controlled by the church and a handful of scholars.
So it was like this exclusive club, and then, boom, the printing press throws the doors wide open.
Suddenly, you can mass-produce books. Ideas can spread so much faster and reach way more people, and it meant people could access knowledge directly, instead of having to rely on priests or scholars to interpret things for them.
So the printing press becomes this incredible tool for spreading Renaissance ideas all across Europe.
It was a game changer.
And it feels like Europe's about to go through some even bigger changes. Things are really starting to heat up now.
You're telling me, with the decline of feudalism and the rise of humanism, well, it's the perfect setup for a revolution within the church itself. That's where the Reformation comes in.
And that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive. All right, so we left off with Europe buzzing with all these new ideas thanks to the Renaissance. But all that questioning wasn't going to stop with art and philosophy. Now we're getting into the Reformation, and things are about to get seriously shaken up in the religious department. What was it about the Catholic Church that really had people riled up?
Well, you got to remember, the church was the dominant force. But under the surface, there was this growing feeling that things were off, like the sale of indulgences. That didn't sit right with a lot of folks.
The indulgences. That's like buying your way out of sin, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, hey, give the church some money and you can shorten your time in purgatory.
Yeah.
People were literally paying to reduce their punishment for their sins.
That seems a little, I don't know, transactional for a church that's supposed to be about saving souls.
Exactly. A lot of people saw it as a straight-up abuse of power. Like the church was more interested in money than spiritual guidance. And it wasn't just indulgences. There was corruption within the clergy, too. Some priests were living pretty cushy lifestyles, which kind of clashed with their vows of poverty.
So there's all this simmering discontent, like this feeling that the church is straying from its core values. And then along comes Martin Luther.
Right place, right time. Luther was a German monk, and he became the voice of all that discontent. In 1517, he nails his 95 theses to a church door in Wittenberg. Basically a giant list of complaints about the church's practices, especially the whole indulgence thing.
So he kind of throws on the gauntlet, right? What happens next?
Well, Luther's ideas hit a nerve. He's saying that salvation isn't something you can buy or earn. It's a gift from God, received through faith. And thanks to the printing press, boom, these ideas spread like wildfire.
It's like Luther goes viral 16th century style.
Totally. And of course, the church is not happy about it.
No surprise there.
But people all over Europe are ready for a change. They want a more authentic, less corrupt form of Christianity.
So it's not just theological nitpicking. It's about a genuine desire to reform the church.
Exactly. It's about getting back to basics. And Luther wasn't alone. You've got figures like John Calvin coming up with his own ideas, like predestination, this idea that God has already chosen who gets saved. Huge influence in places like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Scotland.
So all these different strands of reform are popping up, each with their own spin on faith. What's interesting is how this religious upheaval gets mixed up with political power struggles.
Right. Remember we were talking about powerful monarchs before? Well, a lot of them saw the Reformation as a chance to break free from the Pope's control. They realized they could have more power over their own lands, their own churches, if they sided with reformers.
So it's a perfect storm, right? You've got the reformers questioning the church's authority, and you've got monarchs eager to grab more power for themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our sources really highlight that political motivation played a big role in the Reformation spreading. Take Germany. A lot of German princes saw supporting Luther as a way to weaken the Holy Roman Emperor, who was a staunch Catholic.
So religion and politics totally intertwined.
Totally. It's all connected. And it reminds me of Henry VIII and his whole drama with the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah, the one who wanted to ditch his wife because the Pope said no to a divorce.
That's the one. He basically says, fine, I'll make my own church. Declares himself head of the Church of England. Breaks away from Rome entirely.
All because he couldn't get an annulment. That's wild. A personal grudge reshaping the whole religious landscape of England.
It shows just how much personal motivations, religious ideas, and political ambition were all tangled up back then.
It really makes you think about how history could have unfolded differently if some things played out another way. And speaking of changes, amidst all this, we see those Renaissance ideas about national identity really taking root, too.
Right. One of the big things the reformers did was translate the Bible into languages people actually spoke: English, German, French. Huge deal. Now, everyday folks who couldn't read Latin could access the scriptures directly.
So people are identifying with their own languages and cultures instead of just blindly following Rome.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to interpret the Bible for themselves, fosters a sense of national unity, and challenges the church's claim to be the only interpreter of God's word.
So you've got the Reformation rocking the church's world, but they're not just going to sit back and watch it all happen.
Nope. They launched the Counter-Reformation, basically a push to clean up their act, address some of those corruption issues that fueled the Protestant movement, but also to fight back against the spread of Protestantism.
So what do?
Well, they established new religious orders, like the Jesuits. They were super effective at spreading Catholic teachings and battling Protestantism. They sent these soldiers of Jesus, as they were called, on missions all over the globe: Europe, Asia, the Americas.
Wow, soldiers of Jesus, that's a powerful image. So you've got this religious tug of war going on, with Protestants and Catholics battling for influence.
Exactly. And unfortunately, things didn't always stay peaceful.
Right, religious wars.
The Reformation sparked a whole series of wars that tore Europe apart. Catholics and Protestants battling it out for decades. It was a brutal time.
It's hard to believe that differences in belief could lead to such violence.
It's a dark chapter in history, but it shows how deeply intertwined religion, politics, and power were back then. It wasn't just about different beliefs. It was about control, authority, who ruled nations. These new religious ideas became weapons in a bigger power struggle.
Makes you wonder what Europe would look like today if things had gone differently. So much hinging on these shifts in religious beliefs.
As a domino effect. One small change leads to another, and the whole landscape is transformed.
And that transformation doesn't stop with religion and politics. When we come back for the final part of our deep dive, we'll see how all this sets the stage for a revolution in how people thought about science and the universe. A revolution that's still shaping our world today. Okay, so we've been through a lot, right? The collapse of feudalism, the explosion of the Renaissance, all that upheaval with the Reformation. But buckle up, because we're heading into the scientific revolution now, and this is where things get really crazy.
It does get pretty wild.
Yeah. This is when all those old truths about the universe get thrown out the window, and people start thinking about the world in a completely new way. And what's so cool is how all this ties into everything we've talked about already.
Oh, it's all connected. Remember how humanism encouraged people to question authority? That includes questioning what the church was saying about the natural world.
Right, they're not just taking things at face value anymore.
Exactly. And then the Reformation, with its focus on individual interpretation, well, that just throws more fuel on the fire.
It's like everyone saying, hey, maybe we can figure things out for ourselves, instead of just blindly accepting what they're told.
Right. They start observing the world around them, drawing their own conclusions. And let's not forget our old friend, the printing press.
That 16th century scientific journal.
Sharing all the latest discoveries.
Exactly. So where do we even start with this explosion of scientific thought?
Well, let's kick things off with Nicholas Copernicus. He throws a real wrench in the works with his heliocentric theory.
Okay, remind me what that was all about.
Up until then, everyone thought the Earth was the center of the universe, right? Everything revolved around us. Copernicus comes along and says, nope, it's the sun that's at the center. Earth's just another planet going around it.
Major downgrade for planet Earth. I bet the church wasn't thrilled about that.
Not at all. It challenged their whole view of humanity's place in creation. Talk about a radical idea.
But it must have set the stage for others to start thinking differently.
It did. Then you have Galileo using this new invention, the telescope, to make observations that backed up Copernicus.
Galileo. The one who got in trouble with the church.
Yeah. He was a true pioneer. He saw moons orbiting Jupiter. More evidence that not everything revolved around the Earth. And the church. They weren't having it.
They probably saw it as a direct attack on their authority.
Absolutely. It's funny, right? We take these ideas for granted now, but back then, they were considered dangerous, even heretical.
Galileo basically ended up on trial for his discoveries.
Yeah, they put him on trial for heresy, forced him to take back what he said. But you can't suppress the truth forever, right?
Other scientists kept pushing the boundaries.
Like Johannes Kepler. He figures out that planets don't move in perfect circles. Their orbits are elliptical.
So, the universe wasn't this perfectly ordered system people thought it was?
It was way more complex than they imagined. And then comes Isaac Newton, who really blows the roof off our understanding of the universe.
Newton, the apple guy, what did he do?
That's the one. He shows that the same force that pulls an apple to the ground also governs how planets and stars move. His law of universal gravitation explains how everything in the universe is connected, attracting each other.
Everything's pulling on everything else. That's mind-blowing.
It is. And the scientific revolution wasn't just happening in astronomy. Medicine was changing too. Andreas Vesalius, for example. He revolutionized anatomy by actually dissecting bodies and creating these incredibly detailed anatomical drawings.
I've seen some of those drawings. Beautiful, but kind of creepy.
Totally. And then William Harvey figures out how blood circulates through the body, pumped by the heart. Changes everything people thought they knew about how our bodies work.
So much for those old theories. It must have been a wild time to be alive. Exciting, but also a little scary, I bet.
It was. It was a time of massive upheaval, a true revolution in how people saw the world.
So from art and humanism to religious turmoil to a whole new way of thinking about science, it was a crazy ride getting from the medieval world to the modern era.
It really was. And the effects of all that change, we're still feeling them today. I mean, think about it. The ideas that emerged during the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, they all laid the groundwork for things like the Enlightenment, modern science, even the values we hold dear today, democracy, individual rights, all of that.
It's incredible how it's all connected, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think, what will historians say about our time, centuries from now? What are the big movements happening right now that will shape the future?
It's a great question to ponder. Makes you realize that history isn't just something in a textbook. It's happening right now.
We're living it.
We are. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. And wow, what a whirlwind of ideas and events. But remember, folks, this is just a starting point.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning. Keep diving deeper into history. We'll see you next time.